Hello students, welcome to IAS by Heart. Welcome to the Prelims High series. In this series, we'll be looking at the important topics from the UPSC Prelims 2020 perspective. This is the current affairs class and this is class 2. If you haven't checked out our class 1 video, kindly check the link in the description box. Let's get into the video. The first question is from Polity. Consider the following statements about India enterprise architecture, in short, India. With India, there will be one personalized account for each individual and he or she can avail all government services from that account. Okay. The second statement says the Shillong Declaration on E-Governance calls for timely implementation of India enterprise architecture, India. Okay. The correct answer for this question is C, both 1 and 2. Let's look at more on India. This India aims to provide one personalized account for every individual and the aim is he or she can avail all government services from that account itself. This shall eliminate the need to visit separate site and have separate logins, that is minimum government and maximum governance. You can even quote this in GS2 governance paper as a case study. The next point with India would be inching closer towards digital governance and establish itself as a knowledge economy as envisaged in the Digital India initiative. Let's see what is Shillong Declaration on E-Governance, which was signed last year. This was signed in the 22nd National Conference on E-Governance, which was held in Shillong with the adoption of Shillong Declaration. So they can even ask you a question, what is Shillong Declaration related to? It is related to e-governance. The theme of this conference was Digital India, Success to Excellence. This conference was organized by Ministry of Personnel and MeitY. Moving on to the next question. The next question is from Economy. The second question, consider the following statements about government bond or sovereign bond. Sovereign bonds can be denominated in both foreign and domestic currency. This is a factual statement. So far, the government has issued only bonds in the domestic market. This is talking about the Indian government. The answer is both these statements are true. Let's look at the explanation. A government bond as a sovereign bond is a form of a debt instrument that the government undertakes when it issues bonds in the promise to pay periodic interest payments and also repay the entire face value on the maturity date. In Budget 2020, the Finance Minister announced that the government would start raising part of its gross borrowing program via sovereign bonds in external markets in external currencies. But unfortunately, this idea was not taken up later. Sovereign bonds can be denominated in both foreign and in domestic currency. This is a factual statement again. So far, the Indian government has only issued bonds in the domestic market, unlike various countries which raise bonds in various external currencies. Let's move on to the next question. This question is from International Relations. 13th question, arrange the following places in ascending order, that is from low to high, based on their distance from equator. Okay. The options are Taiwan, Hong Kong, Paracel Islands and Spratly Islands. This question is here because of the South China Sea dispute. If this is the equator, they are asking the ascending order, that is from low to high on the distance from equator. So, which is nearer to the equator and which is far? It says the Spratly Islands, then the Paracel Islands, Hong Kong and then Taiwan. This is the answer. Let's look at the map for clearer understanding. This is the equator that goes through Indonesia and here is the Spratly Islands, here is the Paracel Islands, this is Hong Kong and this is Taiwan. If you have been following the geopolitical issue in this area, you will be able to answer this question. Now, since South China Sea is an important topic in both prelims and mains, let's dig into this topic deeper. What is the South China Sea dispute? Where is the South China Sea? South China Sea is an arm of Western Pacific Ocean. It is in the Southeast Asia. The bordering territories, let's look at this from clockwise. From north, it is China and then Taiwan, Philippines here and then Malaysia here and here, Brunei, it is also bordering South China Sea, Indonesia, it is an archipelago, the world's largest archipelago Indonesia, Singapore and Vietnam. These are the countries which are bordering South China Sea. It is connected by the Taiwan Strait. See here, this is the Taiwan Strait and Luzon Strait with the Philippine Sea. Now it contains numerous shoals, reefs, atolls and islands. The major ones are the Paracel Islands, the Spratly Islands and the Scarborough Shoal. Moving on. So why is the South China Sea very important? Let's look at some of the facts. Because of its strategic importance, as you have seen, this location is very important as this is the link between the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. The very famous strait, which is the Strait of Malacca, is in this sea. Let's look where it is in the map. This is the Strait of Malacca. This connects Indian Ocean from this side and Pacific Ocean in this side. According to the UNCTAD, 1/3 of the global shipping passes through this sea, and therefore this is a geopolitical water body. And also 1/3 of the entire world's marine biodiversity is here, and this even contains many lucrative fishes, that is fishes which are very rare and costly. Therefore this provides food security to the entire Southeast Asia. This is believed to have huge oil and gas reserves. This is the reason why South China Sea is very important to so many countries. Moving on, what is this 9-dash line which is related to this dispute? This is the 9-dash line. As you can see, this line is claimed by China and it stretches hundreds of kilometers south and east to China. This is China and it stretches in both the directions, south and to the east, covering the strategic Paracel and Spratly Islands. China claims that this 9-dash line has a history of over 2000 years and these two islands belong to China. The problem with this is, according to the law of seas, if we draw a map for 200 nautical miles from all these countries, South China Sea does not cover Paracel and Spratly Islands. Let's look at this map. Here, this is where the exclusive economic zone of various countries end. This is for Philippines, Brunei, Malaysia, Indonesia, Vietnam, and this is China. But China is claiming that Paracel and Spratly Islands, which are here, is also part of China. So what are the issues involved in this? China claims that most of the contested sea, almost up to Philippines, belongs to itself, and it has started building artificial islands with heavy military developments. That is a cause of concern in this problem, which worries the neighboring countries. This 9-dash line asserted by China violates the principle of exclusive economic zone. Let's see what is exclusive economic zone. Here is where the land ends. For 12 nautical miles, it is called as a territorial sea. And another 12 nautical miles is called as contiguous zone. And from the sea, for 200 nautical miles, it is called as exclusive economic zone. A country has rights only till this exclusive economic zone. Beyond this, it is called as high seas or international waters. To understand this even more, if here is the border of India, for 12 nautical miles, it is called as territorial waters. Another 12 nautical miles from the border of territorial waters, it is called as contiguous zone. And from the land up to 200 nautical miles, it is called as exclusive economic zone. And one more fact is 1 nautical mile is 1.85 kilometers. A country has rights only up to its exclusive economic zone. But what China is claiming is beyond this exclusive economic zone even for China. That is the bone of contention here. Now, 4 of other Asian nations have also made territorial claims in this disputed waters, like Indonesia, Vietnam, Philippines, in the South China Sea. So that is where the problem is complicated. I hope now you have a clearer outline of what is South China Sea dispute. Moving on to the next question, which is from Internal Security. Consider the following statement about Chief of Defence Staff. Ministry of Home Affairs created the post of Chief of Defence Staff. If you apply a little common sense, as you know, this is related to the field of defense. So Ministry of Home Affairs has a little role compared to the Ministry of Defense. So we can eliminate this option. Now, Chief of Defence Staff will not exercise any military command including over the 3 services. This might be true because he has to be impartial, right? None of the other powers of the service chiefs has been curtailed or transferred. General Bipin Rawat has been appointed as the country's first CDS. This is a factual statement and you know that this statement is correct. After eliminating first statement, we have option B as the correct answer. Moving on to the explanation, since this is a new topic, we have a high probability of this coming in the prelims. Let's look into it. Recently, Ministry of Defence created the post Chief Defence Staff to provide effective leadership at the top level. The outgoing Army Chief, General Bipin Rawat, has been appointed as the country's first Chief of Defence Staff. This post is created and it is a 4-star general post with salary equivalent to that of a service chief. The maximum age limit is 65 years. This is even a potential prelims question. Now moving on. What are his powers? He will serve as the permanent chairman of Chief of Staff Committee, which comprises of 3 service chiefs. Before, this chairman of the committee was the senior most chief among the 3 services, and this happened by rotation. Now he will also be the member of Defence Acquisition Council. Remember, Defence Acquisition Council is chaired by the Defence Minister, whereas Defence Planning Committee is headed by the National Security Advisor. Remember this fact. Okay, and Chief of Defence Staff, he will also function as a military advisor to the Nuclear Command Authority. He also has a role to implement the 5-year Defence Capital Acquisition Plan and the 2-year Annual Acquisition Plan. These plans are regarding procurement of military equipments. What are the other powers? The Chief of Defence Staff, he will also head the Department of Military Affairs. This is the new department that is created within the Ministry of Defence, and CDS will function as its secretary. He is also vested with the authority to provide directives to the 3 chiefs. He will act as the principal military advisor to the Defence Minister in all tri-service matters. But the 3 chiefs will continue to advise the Defence Minister. You have to remember this. They are not replaced. CDS will only be contributing to the advice given by the other 3 chiefs. CDS will not exercise any military command. The aim of this move is to provide impartial advice to the political leadership. Since this is the new creation of the Ministry of Defence, let's look more about this Department of Military Affairs. This is so far looked after by the Department of Defence and it was headed by the Defence Secretary. Now this will be headed by the Chief of Defence Staff. Okay, the work exclusively pertaining to military matters will now be handled by the Department of Military Affairs. On the other hand, Defence will deal with larger issues. For example, the military training institutions now will fall under DMA, whereas the Institute of Defence Studies and Analysis and National Defence College, all this will fall under the Defence Department. The Armed Forces of the Union, Integrated Headquarters, Territorial Army, now this all will come under DMA. All the 3 armed forces, Army, Navy and Air Force. Before they used to come under Department of Defence, but now they will fall under DMA. Understanding more, Ministry of Defence has 4 departments: Department of Defence, Department of Defence Production, Defence Research and Development, Department of Ex-Servicemen Welfare. Now a new department called as Department of Military Affairs is added. This Department of Defence will be headed by the Defence Secretary, Military Affairs by CDS, Defence Production by the Secretary for Defence Production, and Department of Defence Research will be held by the DRDO Chief, and the Ex-Servicemen Welfare will be held by the Secretary of the same. Now CDS will have a dual-hatted role, that is, as we have seen before, permanent of the Chief of Staff Committee and the Department of Military Affairs. Remember with this, since this is a new move, we have a high potential for a question from this area. Moving on, let's look at the next question from the environmental chapter. Match these animals and birds with their respective IUCN status. Every year we usually have one question related to the IUCN status. Now let's look at this. Great Indian Bustard. This is the state bird of Rajasthan. one-horn rhino, the state animal of Assam, black buck, state animal of Punjab and Haryana, Asiatic lion, the state animal of Gujarat. Now we have to match these animals with the IUCN status. Great Indian bustard, it is a critically endangered animal. One-horn rhino is a vulnerable species. Black buck is the least concern. And Asiatic lion is an endangered species. Let's look at the answer. Now moving on to the explanation part. As we have seen before, the Great Indian bustard is a critically endangered species, hence it becomes very important. One-horn rhino, it is vulnerable. Black buck falls under least concern category. Asiatic lion is an endangered species. Now let's see what is the criteria to name a species as critically endangered or vulnerable. There are three main categories. The first one is the population decline, global range and the global population size. For example, if a species is to be designated as critically endangered, the population decline should have been 80% over the next 10 years or 3 generations. For endangered, it is 50% decline, and for vulnerable, 30% of the population should have declined over the next 10 years. Moving on to the next category. The global range of a species for a critically endangered category should be less than 100 square kilometers. For endangered, it is 5,000 square kilometers. For a vulnerable species, it is 20,000 square kilometers. Regarding the global population size, for a critically endangered, less than 50 individuals should be present. For endangered category, 250 individuals, and for vulnerable category, 1,000 individuals. Here is the table of critically endangered species in India. Since there are only less number of species in critically endangered category, I have given you this table. Memorizing or keeping yourself familiar with this table will help you in the elimination technique in prelims. This is the list of critically endangered birds, reptiles, fishes and mammals. For example, Great Indian bustard is a very important critically endangered bird. The other one is the types of vulture like white-backed vulture, red-headed vulture, white-bellied heron and slender-billed vulture. For example, this is the slender-billed vulture. Next is the pink-headed duck, which is also an important critically endangered bird. This is the pink-headed duck. Moving on to the critically endangered reptile, gharial, which was asked in last year prelims question paper. It is a saltwater crocodile. Leatherback turtle, river terrapin are also other animals. Moving on to the critically endangered mammals, pygmy hog, this is the pygmy hog. Nicobar white-tailed shrew and Malabar civet, this is the Malabar civet. Kashmiri stag or hangul, which is found only in Kashmir, is also a critically endangered mammal. This is the Kashmiri stag or hangul. Another critically endangered fish is Ganges shark, which is very important. Recently, Pondicherry shark is also added to this list. So, if you familiarize with this list, you will be able to eliminate at least 1 or 2 options from the question. Now, moving on to the next topic. This is the science and technology. Consider the following statements about the proton therapy, which is recently seen in news. It is a type of radiation therapy which uses protons rather than X-rays to treat cancer. India's first proton therapy center was inaugurated in Visakhapatnam for cancer treatment, and proton therapy is highly specialized and it is applicable to all types of cancer. With any kind of new invention in the science and tech field, there will always be some drawback. So, regarding the third statement, proton therapy is highly specialized, maybe that's true, and it is applicable to all types of cancer, that's kind of skeptical. Let's look at the answer. Answer is 1 only, because in the second statement, the first proton therapy center was inaugurated in Chennai. Let's go to the explanation. Vice President of India inaugurated India's first proton therapy center in Chennai. This is for the treatment of cancer. This is the South Asia's first such center, and with this, India became the 16th country in the world to offer the therapy. This proton therapy is a type of a radiation therapy which uses protons rather than X-rays. Why is this? Because protons can be more tightly focused than X-rays. And it is one of the most advanced forms of external beam radiation therapy. This is also called as proton beam therapy. This therapy is particularly effective for pediatric cancers, tumors affecting the brain, eye, and various other vital organs. Have a look at this proton therapy video for even more clearer understanding. Moving on, what are the advantages and how is it better than the X-rays? Usual radiation therapy utilizes X-rays that is made of photons, that is different from protons. The problem with this is it deposits majority of the radiation dose immediately upon entering the body. These X-ray beams are effective in controlling, but they also deliver an exit dose, meaning if here is the tumor, X-ray focuses this whole area. Because of this, not just the tumor is targeted, but also the nearby healthy tissues. This is also affected. This exit dose is a cause of concern as it damages the normal tissues and it can affect the patient's quality of life post-treatment. Whereas in proton therapy, these proton beams target the tumor only. This targets only the tumor and the nearby healthy tissues are not disturbed, with sub-millimeter accuracy leaving the nearby tissues and organs unharmed. This is the main advantage of proton therapy. And also there is no exit dose in case of proton beam. As I said before, everything will have some disadvantages or challenges. With regarding to the proton therapy, it is highly specialized and obviously this will be very expensive. And the problem is this cannot be applied to all type of cancers. This is one major disadvantage. And then more research and clinical trials are needed to make this treatment more affordable and applicable to all types of cancers. Since this is a new topic, we can expect a sure question from this. Moving on to the next topic, which is from the social issues. Consider the following statement about SDG India Index. Though this is not the first time and this index is being carried out for the second time, this becomes very important topic. The second edition of the SDG India Index was released by Ministry of Personnel, Public Grievances and Pensions. This index has 232 indicators similar to the SDG indicators. If you know, the SDG has 17 goals and 232 indicators. The question is, does SDG India Index also have the same 232 indicators? There are 4 classification criteria based on SDG index scores. Okay, the correct answer is option C, 3 only. Let's move on to the explanation. It is Niti Aayog and not the Ministry of Personnel which released this SDG India Index. This comprehensively documents the progress made by the Indian states and union territories towards achieving the 2030 SDG targets. This index has been developed in collaboration with Ministry of Statistics, United Nations in India and Global Green Growth Projects. So there are 4 collaborators: Ministry of Statistics, UN India and Global Green Growth Institute. As we know, UN SDGs has 232 indicators, whereas this index developed by Niti Aayog has 100 indicators of its own, which is taken from the Ministry of Statistics National Indicator Framework (NIF). Let's have a quick review of the 17 SDG goals. These goals will come in handy for your mains examination. These are the 17 goals. They are more important for any country's development like poverty, hunger, good health, education, etc. I would advise you to kindly memorize all these 17 goals. Now moving on about this SDG India Index, this 2019 index more robust than the first edition, as the first edition had only 13 goals, whereas this has 16 out of the 17 goals. The previous one had only 13 goals. The composite score was computed in the range of 1 to 100 based on the performance of 16 SDGs. The higher the score of the state or union territory, it is closer towards achieving the targets. Now the classification criteria based on this index, if the score is 0 to 49, it falls under the aspirant category. For 50 to 64, it is in the performer category, whereas 65 to 99, it is in the front runner, and if it scores 100, it is in the achiever category. Let's look at the highlights of this index. India's composite score has improved from 57 in 2018 to 60. So it has improved 3 places, moving on to 60. All the states and union territories are either in performer or front runner category. We have to be proud of this. Now, in this index, Kerala has achieved the first rank with a score of 70, which is followed by Himachal Pradesh, Andhra, Telangana and Tamil Nadu in the third position. The worst performer is Bihar with a score of just 50 only. The biggest improvers are UP, Odisha and Sikkim, which have moved from the previous ranks. And the maximum gains has been made in goal 6, which deals with clean water and sanitation, and goal 9, which deals with industry, innovation and infra, goal 7, which deals with affordable and clean energy. And this is the map. Kerala has the high score, which is followed by Himachal Pradesh, which is in the second place. Tamil Nadu, Andhra and Telangana is in the third place, followed by Karnataka in the fourth place and Sikkim in the fifth place. With all this, nutrition and gender equality continues to be a big problem for India. This is the area we have to focus. You can quote this in your mains answer. Moving on to the next question, which is from art and culture. The 18th question. Recently, a Buddhist relic having features belonging to Amaravati School of Art was unearthed in Andhra Pradesh. In this context, let's consider the following about Amaravati School of Art. This school of art flourished in the region of Andhra, which is between the valleys of Krishna and Godavari. The main patrons of this art were the Kushanas. If you would apply a little logic, we have read in history that Kushanas occupied majority of the Indian territory in the northern side. In fact, they are predominantly found in Kashmiri region. So you can at least come to a conclusion that either option 1 or 2 is the correct one. Third statement, there is a prominence to figures drawn from nature rather than that of human figures. The correct answer is 1 only, because as I said, Kushanas formed in the northern side, and this is actually twisted because in Amaravati School of Art, the prominence is given to human figures rather than that of nature. Let's look at the explanation. This is the relic that was recently found. This was found in river Guntalakama in Andhra. This Buddhist relic is a limestone pillar which is carved with lotus. This is supposed to be the lotus medallion at the center and top portions on all 4 sides. Now let's look more about the Amaravati School of Art. This is believed to have flourished in the region of Andhra Pradesh between the valleys of Krishna and Godavari. The main patrons, as I said, are Satvahanas, but it was carried on even later by the successors called as Ikshavaku rulers. And this art flourished between 150 BC until 350 AD. The important characteristic is the narrative art. The medallions were carved in such manner that they depict an incident. That's why it is called as a narrative art. For example, in one medallion, it depicts a whole story of an elephant taming by Buddha. Another characteristic is it gives prominence to human figures rather than figures drawn from nature. For even more convenience, here I have compared various arts that we know from art and culture subject: Gandhara, Mathura and Amaravati. And here are various categories like where it is influenced from, what are the predominant materials used, is there any religious tone, who are the patrons, and description of images. For example, Gandhara had influence from Greek art features, whereas Mathura and Amaravati are indigenous. The predominant stone material used is grey sandstone with respect to Gandhara, red sandstone for Mathura art, and Amaravati has white marble. Religious tones, this is mainly Buddhist. Mathura is mainly Buddhist, Hindu and Jainism. whereas Amaravati is predominantly Buddhist. The patrons of Gandhara was Kushanas, for Mathura also Kushanas, for Amaravati it was Satavahanas and Ikshvaku rulers. The description of images: for Gandhara, spiritual image of Buddha with wavy hair, beard and moustache. In Mathura art we can see the delighted image of Buddha without beard and moustache. Though these seem to be a trivial details, this will come in handy in your prelims elimination techniques. In Amaravati, there is depiction of Jataka stories. Kindly pause the video and have a look at this table for a better understanding. Moving on to the next question. This is from the famous government schemes. Ministry of Health and Family Welfare recently launched a campaign called as SANS. This is aimed at neutralizing which of the following diseases? Hepatitis B, neonatal mortality, pneumonia and AIDS. The answer is pneumonia. Let's look at the explanation. Health and Family Welfare recently launched a campaign, and this is called as SANS, which is an acronym for Social Awareness and Action to Neutralize Pneumonia Successfully. Because WHO identifies pneumonia as the single largest cause of death in children worldwide. But the truth is, this pneumonia is preventable and totally treatable. So aim of this campaign is to reduce child mortality due to pneumonia, because around 15% of the deaths of children under the age of 5. Under 5 mortality, 15% deaths is due to pneumonia. And also to mobilize people and train health personnel and other stakeholders to provide prioritized treatment. Next, what are the key features of the program? The child suffering from pneumonia will be treated with a pre-referral dose of antibiotic amoxicillin. Remember this name, this is related to pneumonia treatment. By the ASHA workers. Pulse oximeter, this is a device used to monitor oxygen saturation. This will be used for identification of low oxygen levels in the blood of the child. A mass awareness campaign will be launched about the effective solutions like breastfeeding, immunization, etc. So what will happen if one gets this disease? This affects mainly the lungs of the human beings. This is the normal air sacs. But if it is affected by pneumonia, the air sacs get inflamed with fluids. This condition we call it as pneumonia. And the major common cause is due to the bacteria called as Streptococcus pneumoniae. Here the air sacs of an infected individual lungs, these are the small air sacs, and these are called as alveoli. They became inflamed due to deposits of fluid and pus, making it painful and difficult for them to breathe. So if anyone contracts pneumonia, the main problem would be difficulty in breathing. Who are vulnerable? Children and the elderly people who are above 65 years are very vulnerable to this disease. Moving on to the last question of this session. What do you know about Yukti portal? This is a unique portal and dashboard to monitor and record the efforts and initiative of Ministry of External Affairs. The portal gives input for better planning, and it will enable to monitor effectively the activities for 6 months. Okay, the correct answer is 2 only, because this portal is developed by Ministry of HRD. Let's know more details about this. Yukti is an acronym for Young India Combating COVID with Knowledge, Technology and Innovation. So this portal is established on the wake of COVID disease. This is a unique portal and dashboard to monitor and record the efforts and initiatives of HRD Ministry. This portal intends to cover the different dimensions of COVID challenges in a very holistic and comprehensive way. The prime aim is to keep the academic community healthy both physically and mentally, and to enable a continuous high quality learning environment for learners. Because of this COVID pandemic, there has been a shutdown of colleges and schools, so there is a boom in online education. This portal tries to explore more in the field of online education. This portal allows various institutions to share their strategies and various challenges which are because of the unprecedented situation of COVID-19. This will give inputs for better planning and will enable the ministry to monitor effectively the activities for 6 months. This will establish a two-way communication, that is between the ministry and the institution, so that it can provide necessary support system to the institutions. That's all for today's class, students. I hope this class has been useful and informative. Thank you all.